Are we expecting people? Can we put curtains on this window? I don't... This shirt, it's nice. It looks really good on you.
Well, you could
Take them off?
I don't give a fuck if you take your...
Oh, no.
We also have something we wanted to talk. Feel a very strong connection.
It's amazing. Where you go, man? They're fucking with us.
We really just want to see the partner.
Why am I... Just...
Yes.
Me too.
Yes, also.
Welcome to Z Cineplex, say your ultimate entertainment destination. Welcome to Z Cineplex, the home of entertainment, creativity, and cinematic excitement. Our channel is dedicated to bringing viewers a rich collection of engaging content that celebrates the world of movies, storytelling, and visual entertainment. Whether you're a passionate film enthusiast, someone who enjoys discovering new cinematic experiences, or simply looking for high-quality entertainment, Z Cineplex is designed to be your go-to destination. We strive to create content that is informative, enjoyable, and engaging for audiences of all ages, offering a unique blend of movie-related features, entertainment updates, insightful discussions, creative videos, and much more. Every upload is crafted with attention to quality, ensuring that our viewers receive an enjoyable experience that keeps them coming back for more. At Z Cineplex, we believe that cinema is more than just watching films. It's about experiencing emotions, exploring stories, appreciating creativity, and connecting with people who share the same passion for entertainment. Our mission is to build a vibrant community where movie lovers and entertainment enthusiasts can discover exciting content, share their opinions, and stay connected with the latest trends in the entertainment industry. We are committed to consistently improving our content, embracing new ideas, and delivering videos that entertain, inform, and inspire our growing audience. Whether you're here for movie highlights, entertainment discussions, reviews, cinematic moments, or fresh creative content, Z Cineplex promises an enjoyable journey filled with excitement, quality, and unforgettable entertainment. Join our community by subscribing, turning on notifications, and becoming part of the Z Cineplex family as we continue to explore the fascinating world of cinema and entertainment together. Thank you for your support, and welcome to Z Cineplex, wherever video brings entertainment to life. The Invite is a 2026 American comedy drama that combines adult relationship comedy, intimate character drama, awkward social humor, and an increasingly revealing examination of marriage and emotional intimacy. The film is directed by Olivia Wilde, who also takes on one of the central acting roles, and features an ensemble cast led by Seth Rogen, Penelope, copyright Cruz, and Edward Norton. The screenplay was written by Will McCormack and Rashida Jones and serves as an English-language adaptation of Chesque's acclaimed 2020 Spanish film The People Upstairs. Sentimental. Rather than transforming the original concept into a conventional Hollywood romantic comedy, The Invite retains its central idea of using one seemingly ordinary evening to expose the hidden tensions, insecurities, frustrations, desires, and misunderstandings existing between two couples. At its core, the film is concerned with the complicated nature of long-term relationships and asks difficult questions about whether intimacy can survive when communication begins to disappear, whether honesty is always beneficial, and whether people can genuinely understand their partners without first confronting uncomfortable truths about themselves. The story revolves around Joe and Angela, a married couple whose relationship has gradually lost much of the emotional and romantic connection it once possessed. Joe, portrayed by Seth Rogen, and Angela, portrayed by Olivia Wilde, remain together, but their marriage has entered a period in which everyday routines, unresolved disagreements, emotional distance, and unspoken disappointments have created an increasingly uncomfortable gaps between them. The relationship is not presented as a simple case of one person being responsible for everything that has gone wrong. Instead, The film portrays their problems as the cumulative result of years of communication difficulties, changing expectations, personal insecurities, and an inability to openly address subjects that have become too uncomfortable to discuss. Joe has become emotionally withdrawn and increasingly passive about the problems surrounding his marriage, while Angela carries frustrations and anxieties that she struggles to express without turning conversations into arguments. Their interactions suggest that they still care about one another, but caring alone has not been enough to preserve the closeness they once shared. The situation becomes more complicated when Joe and Angela decide to invite their upstairs neighbors, Pi+A and Hawk, to dinner. Played by Penelope, copyright Lope Cruz and Edward Norton, respectively. The neighbors immediately introduce an entirely different energy into the couple's otherwise strained domestic life. Pi+A is confident, outspoken, intelligent, and comfortable discussing subjects that most people might consider too private for casual conversation. Her professional and personal understanding of intimacy gives her a particularly unusual perspective on relationships, while her confidence makes Angela both fascinated and uncomfortable. Hawk, meanwhile, possesses a relaxed charisma and a seemingly effortless ability to communicate with his partner. Together, Pi+A and Hawk initially appear to have achieved a kind of emotional and sexual freedom that Joe and Angela increasingly feel is absent from their own marriage. Their unconventional relationship becomes an object of curiosity, admiration, insecurity, and eventually confrontation for the downstairs couple. At first, the invitation appears to be nothing more than an attempt to socialize with neighbors and perhaps establish a friendship. The evening begins with the familiar rituals of a dinner party: introductions, drinks, small talk, jokes, food, casual observations, and attempts to maintain a pleasant atmosphere. However, the apparent normality of the gathering slowly begins to disappear. The personalities of the four characters are sufficiently different that even harmless conversations begin to acquire a deeper meaning. Joe and Angela become increasingly conscious of the contrast between their own relationship and the apparently open and confident marriage of Pi+A and Hawk. What initially seems attractive about their neighbors gradually becomes threatening because it forces Joe and Angela to recognize the things they have stopped talking about with each other. As the dinner progresses, the conversation moves into increasingly personal territory. Topics that would normally remain private begin to emerge naturally, including relationships, attraction, intimacy, sexual expectations, personal dissatisfaction, emotional needs, and the different ways people define commitment. Because Pi+A is particularly comfortable discussing sexuality and psychological aspects of relationships, she frequently challenges the assumptions held by Joe and Angela. Her openness can be amusing, but it can also be disarming, especially when her observations unintentionally touch upon vulnerabilities that Joe and Angela would rather keep hidden. Hawk's presence provides another contrast, as his calm confidence and apparent acceptance of Pi+A's personality make Joe question whether his own approach to marriage has become too cautious, detached, or emotionally passive. Joe's discomfort becomes increasingly important as he begins comparing himself and his marriage with Hawk. What initially appears to be admiration gradually develops into insecurity. Joe starts questioning whether he has failed to provide Angela with something important and whether their relationship has become stagnant because he has avoided confronting its problems. His tendency to retreat emotionally rather than directly address conflict becomes increasingly visible as the dinner progresses. At the same time, Angela is forced to confront her own feelings of frustration and dissatisfaction. The presence of Pi+A, a woman who seems unusually confident about intimacy in communication, gives Angela an uncomfortable point of comparison. Instead of simply admiring her neighbor, Angela begins to recognize aspects of herself and her own marriage that she has been avoiding. The apparent perfection of Pi+A and Hawk's relationship is also gradually challenged. The film does not ultimately present them as an ideal couple whose lifestyle provides a simple solution to Joe and Angela's problems. Instead, their relationship becomes another example of how appearances can be misleading. Their confidence, openness, An unconventional approach to intimacy may initially suggest that they have mastered the art of communication, but the longer the evening continues, the more complicated their own emotional dynamics become. Their presence therefore serves an important thematic function. They are not simply there to teach Joe and Angela how to have a better marriage. Rather, they demonstrate that every relationship contains contradictions, insecurities, compromises, and unresolved questions. Even when those problems are hidden behind confidence and charm, the dinner consequently becomes an emotional pressure cooker. The apartment, which initially feels comfortable and welcoming, gradually becomes a confined environment in which the four characters have fewer and fewer opportunities to hide behind polite social behavior. Alcohol, personal revelations, awkward exchanges, jokes, disagreements, and unexpected disclosures gradually weaken the social boundaries that normally keep strangers from discussing private matters. Every revelation creates another reaction, and every reaction exposes another layer of the characters' personalities. The humor comes partly from the increasing absurdity of the situation, but beneath the comedy is a serious examination of how couples behave when confronted with evidence that their relationship may not be as healthy or fulfilling as they have convinced themselves it is. One of the film's central ideas is that communication can be both necessary and dangerous. Joe and Angela's marriage has suffered partly because they have avoided saying what they truly think and feel. Yet once the evening begins encouraging them to speak more honestly, the resulting revelations do not immediately make their relationship better. Instead, honesty initially creates greater discomfort. The film therefore avoids presenting communication as a magical solution. Saying what one truly wants can hurt another person. Acknowledging dissatisfaction can destabilize a relationship, and learning the truth about a partner can force someone to reconsider assumptions that have existed for years. The Invite uses these complications to explore whether a relationship can survive genuine honesty when both partners are afraid of what that honesty might reveal. The comedy is consequently built around character rather than spectacle. Much of the film's humor emerges from uncomfortable silences, awkward misunderstandings, personality clashes, blunt observations, escalating conversations, and the increasingly fragile attempts of the characters to maintain the appearance of a civilized dinner party. Rogen's comedic timing provides Joe with an understated source of humor, particularly as his character becomes increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Wilde's performance gives Angela a more emotionally volatile counterbalance, allowing the film to move naturally between sarcastic comedy and genuine frustration. Cruz brings an energetic, confident presence to Pi 8 tilde plus minus A, while Norton gives Hawk a controlled charisma that makes him simultaneously appealing and unsettling to the other characters. The resulting chemistry among the four actors is essential because the film depends heavily on dialogue and interpersonal tension rather than action. The confined structure also allows the Invite to function almost like a theatrical chamber piece. Instead of constantly changing locations or relying on elaborate set pieces, the film derives much of its dramatic momentum from the changing relationships between the four people inside the apartment. The physical environment gradually becomes an extension of their emotional condition. At the beginning, the apartment represents hospitality and social connection. As the evening deteriorates, the same space begins to feel restrictive and claustrophobic. The characters cannot easily escape the conversation because leaving would itself become a statement. The result is a setting in which even small movements, pauses, changes in tone, and facial expressions can carry significant dramatic meaning. The filmmaking approach reinforces this intimacy. The production was shot on 35mm film, giving the movie a tactile and naturalistic visual character that complements its focus on human interaction. Rather than making the apartment appear artificially theatrical, the cinematography and production design allow the environment to feel lived in and believable. The decision to emphasize performance and dialogue means that the camera frequently remains close to the actors, capturing subtle changes in expression and body language as the characters become increasingly uncomfortable. This visual strategy is particularly important because much of the emotional storytelling occurs beneath the dialogue. Characters may joke about something while their expressions reveal that the subject has genuinely hurt them. allowing the film to operate simultaneously as comedy and drama. The chronological shooting approach also contributes to the performances, by allowing the actors to experience the evening in a progression that resembles the character's actual journey. The production could preserve a sense of escalation. The actors were reportedly involved in rehearsals and workshops that helped develop the relationships and emotional dynamics before filming. This approach gives the dinner party a gradual rhythm rather than making it feel like a collection of disconnected scenes. The characters begin with social politeness, become more relaxed, cross increasingly personal boundaries, encounter conflict, and eventually reach points where maintaining the original Section 8 becomes nearly impossible. As a result, the movie's structure mirrors the way a real social gathering can unexpectedly become emotionally revealing. For Olivia Wilde, The Invite represents another stage in her development as a filmmaker. Following Booksmart and Don't Worry Darling, the film demonstrates her continued interest in stories centered on complicated personal relationships and characters whose public appearances differ from their private realities. Her decision to direct while also playing Angela creates an unusual creative challenge because she must simultaneously control the film's overall tone and inhabit one of its most emotionally complicated characters. Angela is not written simply as a sympathetic wife or an angry spouse. Instead, she is presented as someone who can be vulnerable, defensive, frustrated, humorous, contradictory, and occasionally unfair. This complexity allows Wilde to portray the character as a believable adult dealing with the accumulated frustrations of a long-term relationship. Seth Rogen's performance similarly allows the film to explore a more subdued form of comedy. Joe retains some of the awkwardness and comic timing associated with Rogen's screen persona, but the character is also defined by emotional exhaustion and avoidance. Rather than being an exaggerated comic figure, Joe becomes a recognizable portrait of someone who has become comfortable with emotional distance because confronting the underlying problem seems more frightening than living with it. His growing discomfort during the dinner reflects his realization that his marriage may require a level of honesty and vulnerability that he has been unwilling to provide. Copyright Lope Cruz's Pi+A serves as one of the film's most disruptive forces. She enters the story with confidence and a willingness to discuss subjects that make Joe and Angela uncomfortable. Her character's openness challenges conventional assumptions about how couples are expected to behave and communicate. However, the film gradually moves beyond the idea that confidence equals emotional health. Pi+A is ultimately as complicated as the other characters, and her relationship with Hawk contains its own tensions and uncertainties. Cruz's performance therefore helps maintain the film's balance between humor and seriousness, allowing Pi+A to be entertaining without reducing her to a stereotypical liberated character. Edward Norton's Hawk provides a contrasting presence. He initially appears relaxed, self-assured, and comfortable with the unconventional nature of his relationship. His ability to communicate with Pi+A makes Joe increasingly aware of his own shortcomings, creating an undercurrent of comparison and jealousy. Yet Hawk's apparent confidence is also gradually complicated as the evening develops. Like the other characters, he has vulnerabilities and imperfections, reinforcing one of the film's most important observations: there is no single model of a successful relationship, and outsiders can never completely understand what occurs inside another couple's private life. The film's themes extend beyond marriage and sexuality. The Invite is also concerned with aging, self-image, insecurity, social comparison, emotional dependency, and the fear that our relationship may have quietly changed beyond recognition. Joe and Angela are not simply asking whether they still love one another, they are confronting a more difficult question about whether the people they have become still fit together. The presence of another couple forces them to compare their private reality with an external image of happiness. This reflects a broader modern anxiety in which people constantly measure their relationships against those of others, often without understanding the hidden difficulties behind those seemingly perfect relationships. The film also explores the difference between physical intimacy and emotional intimacy. A couple can remain together, share a home, eat meals together, and maintain an outwardly stable life while becoming emotionally distant. Conversely, people can have unconventional arrangements while maintaining a deep level of trust and communication. By placing these two couples together, the story challenges simplistic definitions of what makes a relationship successful. The film does not insist that one couple's lifestyle is inherently superior to another's. Instead, it emphasizes that genuine intimacy depends on honesty, mutual understanding, respect, and the willingness to acknowledge uncomfortable emotions. The Invite premiered at the Eccles Theatre during the 2026 Sundance Film Festival on January 24, 2026. Its Sundance presentation introduced the film to audiences as an intimate adult comedy drama driven primarily by its four central performances and its sharply observed relationship dynamics. The premiere generated strong audience reactions, particularly to the film's humor and increasingly uncomfortable dinner party sequences. Critics generally responded positively to the film, praising its screenplay, ensemble chemistry, performances, and Olivia Wilde's direction. Reviews also noted the challenge of adapting a Spanish chamber comedy for an English-speaking audience while preserving the original film's emphasis on interpersonal tension and adult relationship problems. After its Sundance premiere, The Invite was acquired for theatrical distribution by A24. The distributor initially gave the film a limited theatrical release in the United States on June 26, 2026, allowing it to build awareness through a smaller opening before expanding to a wider audience on July 10. The release strategy positioned the film as an adult-oriented comedy drama rather than a major studio tentpole, relying on positive word-of-mouth, festival recognition, its well-known cast, and the appeal of Wilde's name as both director and performer. The film has a reported running time of approximately 107 minutes and carries an R rating because of its mature themes, sexual material, adult conversations, and strong language. Following its theatrical run, the film also moved into the home entertainment market. By August 11, 2026, The Invite had become available through digital purchase and rental platforms, giving audiences who missed the theatrical release an opportunity to watch the film at home. This transition is particularly significant for a relatively intimate adult comedy drama, as the film's dialogue-driven structure and recognizable cast make it well-suited to home viewing after its theatrical window. Its continuing availability also allows the film to reach audiences beyond its festival and theatrical audience. At the box office, The Invite has achieved the kind of moderate commercial performance generally associated with a specialized adult comedy drama. Rather than competing with large-scale franchise films and effects-driven blockbusters, the movie has relied on its cast, festival profile, critical reception, and word of mouth. Its theatrical performance reflects the challenges faced by original adult-focused films in a marketplace dominated by franchise entertainment. Nevertheless, its international and domestic earnings demonstrate that the film has found an audience beyond its initial Sundance exposure, with its theatrical run supplemented by subsequent digital availability. Ultimately, The Invite uses the simple premise of a dinner between neighbors to create a much broader exploration of contemporary relationships. What begins as an attempt to socialize becomes an emotional examination of marriage, sexuality, jealousy, insecurity, communication, aging, personal expectations, and the gap between how couples appear to others and how they actually function in private. Joe and Angela's relationship serves as the emotional center of the film, while Pi tilde plus minus A and Hawk function as both catalysts and mirrors, forcing them to question assumptions they have long accepted about themselves and their marriage. The film's greatest dramatic tension comes not from an external threat but from the realization that the people sitting around the dinner table know more about one another than they initially intended to reveal. In the end, The Invite is best understood as a character-driven relationship dramedy that uses humor to approach uncomfortable subjects without completely reducing them to jokes. Its contained setting, dialogue-heavy screenplay, four-person ensemble, intimate 35mm cinematography, and gradual escalation allow the film to transform an ordinary dinner party into a revealing emotional battleground. Olivia Wilde's direction balances comedic awkwardness with genuine vulnerability, while the performances of Wilde, Seth Rogen, Penelope copyright Cruz, and Edward Norton give the characters enough complexity to prevent the story from becoming a simple morality tale about which relationship is better. Instead, the film argues that every relationship involves compromises and imperfections, and that genuine closeness requires people to confront truths that may be considerably less comfortable than the polite versions of themselves they present to the outside world. Through its mixture of sharp adult comedy, emotional conflict, sexual candor, and relationship drama, The Invite ultimately becomes a story about the frightening but potentially transformative process of finally talking honestly with the person you thought you already knew best. Set against the intimate residential backdrop of San Francisco, The Invite follows Joe, a struggling musician whose ambitions of establishing himself professionally have failed to materialize. Once hopeful about building a meaningful career through music, Joe now supports himself by teaching jazz at a local conservatory. Although teaching provides him with a stable occupation, it does not satisfy the artistic ambitions that originally motivated him to pursue music. His frustration with his career has gradually become intertwined with dissatisfaction in his personal life, particularly his increasingly troubled marriage to Angela. Angela is a stay-at-home wife and mother, and although she and Joe continue to share a home and family life, their relationship has deteriorated into a cycle of irritation, resentment, sarcasm, and frequent arguments. They still have an established domestic routine, but much of the affection and intimacy that once connected them has disappeared. Their disagreements often begin over insignificant matters but quickly expose deeper frustrations that neither of them has successfully resolved. One of the most persistent sources of conflict between Joe and Angela involves their upstairs neighbors, Penelope and Hawk. The couple frequently hears loud noises coming from the apartment above, particularly sounds associated with their neighbor's active sex life. Joe finds the disturbance deeply irritating and has gradually developed a strong resentment toward the people living upstairs. To him, the noise is another example of how inconsiderate and disconnected his neighbors are from the people around them. Angela, however, has a different attitude. Rather than confronting Penelope and Hawk, she has become curious about them and wants to establish a friendly relationship. This difference in attitude becomes another source of friction between her and Joe. Joe wants to complain, while Angela wants to make a good impression. When Joe returns home from the conservatory one evening, he discovers that Angela has taken matters into her own hands and invited Penelope and Hawk downstairs for dinner. Joe is immediately irritated by the news because he had been preparing to confront the neighbors about their noise rather than welcome them into his home. He cannot understand why Angela would invite people she barely knows into their apartment, especially when their behavior has already caused so much annoyance. Angela, however, insists that Joe behave himself. She wants the evening to go well and believes that creating a friendly relationship with their neighbors may be better than continuing the hostility. Her desire to impress Penelope and Hawk also reveals something about her own emotional state. She is eager for some kind of change and excitement in a life that has increasingly become defined by routine and dissatisfaction. The situation becomes even more awkward when Penelope and Hawk arrive while Joe and Angela are still arguing. Instead of welcoming their guests with a relaxed and confident atmosphere, Angela is forced to abruptly end the disagreement and pretend that everything is fine. Her attempts to present the image of a successful and hospitable household quickly begin to unravel. She realizes that she has not adequately prepared for the dinner and has made several basic mistakes. There is no wine available for the guests, and she has not even checked whether Penelope has any dietary restrictions. These seemingly minor failures make Angela increasingly nervous because she wants the evening to prove that she and Joe are capable of maintaining a pleasant social relationship. Joe, on the other hand, has little interest in helping her preserve this fatal Section 8. Joe's hostility toward the upstairs couple is immediately noticeable. Rather than hiding his irritation behind polite conversation, He is unusually direct and openly expresses his opinions. His bluntness embarrasses Angela, who fears that he will ruin the dinner before it has even properly begun. Yet the response from Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk is not what she expects. Instead of becoming offended by Joe's behavior, they are intrigued by him. They seem to appreciate his willingness to speak honestly and his refusal to participate in conventional social politeness. What Angela considers embarrassing, the neighbors interpret as refreshing. This unexpected reaction begins to change the dynamic of the evening and prevents the dinner from becoming the straightforward confrontation Joe originally imagined. As the evening develops, the four characters gradually relax. What begins as an awkward meeting between neighbors slowly turns into a more personal conversation. They eat, drink, joke, exchange stories, and begin learning details about one another's lives. The initial divisions between the couples become less pronounced, and Joe and Angela start to discover that Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk are considerably more interesting and unconventional than they had assumed. However, Joe's underlying resentment does not disappear completely. He remains suspicious of them and continues to feel uncomfortable about the intimacy that appears to exist within their relationship. The atmosphere becomes especially tense when Joe discovers that Hawk has previously seen Angela naked through a window. For Joe, this revelation is far more significant than a simple accidental incident. His reaction exposes an insecurity that has been present beneath his irritation throughout the evening. He becomes jealous and uncomfortable at the idea that another man has seen his wife in an intimate situation. The revelation also makes Joe more conscious of the emotional and physical distance that exists between himself and Angela. While Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk seem confident and comfortable with intimacy, Joe and Angela have become increasingly disconnected. Joe's anger toward Hawk therefore becomes partly an expression of his own dissatisfaction with his marriage. Later in the evening, Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk finally address the source of the noise that has caused so much conflict between the two apartments. Rather than continuing to leave Joe and Angela guessing, they openly apologize for the disturbances and explain that the relationship involves a much more adventurous social and sexual lifestyle than the downstairs couple had imagined. They reveal that they participate in sex parties, which explains why Joe and Angela have so frequently heard unusual noises from upstairs. The confession initially surprises the couple, but their reaction quickly becomes more complicated than simple embarrassment. Joe and Angela are fascinated by the revelation because it represents an entirely different approach to intimacy from the one they have experienced in their own increasingly stagnant marriage. That disclosure also changes the way Joe and Angela view their neighbors. Until this point, Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk have primarily been an annoyance, defined by the noise coming from their apartment. Now they become figures of curiosity. Their confidence and openness appear to contrast dramatically with the emotional and physical limitations of Joe and Angela's relationship. The revelation forces Joe and Angela to confront something they have largely avoided acknowledging. Their own marriage has become sexually and emotionally inactive. The possibility that they might experience something outside their normal routine therefore becomes unexpectedly appealing. Pi 8 tilde plus minus A then reveals that she and Hawk had another reason for accepting the dinner invitation. They had been considering inviting Joe and Angela to join them in a sexual experience involving other partners. The revelation is both shocking and exciting for the married couple. Rather than immediately rejecting the idea, Joe and Angela find themselves intrigued by the possibility. Their willingness to consider it is significant because it suggests that beneath their constant arguments there is still a desire for excitement and connection. The idea offers them a potential escape from the routine that has come to dominate their relationship. However, Pi 8 tilde plus minus A is also able to recognize something that Joe and Angela themselves have difficulty acknowledging. As a sexologist, she understands that sexual experimentation cannot automatically repair a relationship that is suffering from deeper emotional problems. Throughout the evening, she has watched Joe and Angela argue, criticize each other, and struggle to communicate. Their interest in the proposed experience may be genuine, but Pi 8 tilde plus minus A begins to question whether they are emotionally prepared for it. Their marriage appears too unstable for a new sexual experience to function as a simple solution. Instead of bringing them closer together, it could potentially expose even more of the resentment and insecurity that already exists between them. The situation consequently shifts toward the possibility of swapping partners. The idea creates an atmosphere of nervous anticipation and uncertainty. Joe and Angela have crossed an emotional boundary simply by agreeing to consider the possibility, but when the moment arrives, their confidence begins to disappear. Angela becomes too nervous to initiate intimacy with Hawk. Her hesitation reveals that the fantasy of doing something adventurous is very different from actually confronting the emotional reality of it. Her reaction also suggests that the problems in her marriage cannot simply be bypassed through physical experimentation. Joe's attempt at participating with Pi 8 tilde plus minus A also ends in an unexpectedly comic disaster. While dancing with her, he falls and injures his back. The incident breaks the tension of the situation and adds another layer of awkwardness to an already chaotic evening. What began as a potentially exciting encounter instead becomes uncomfortable and embarrassing. The failed attempt demonstrates how little control any of the four characters actually has over the evening. Their assumptions about what might happen have repeatedly collided with reality, turning the dinner into something far more emotionally complicated than any of them anticipated. The failure of the proposed encounter also intensifies the conflict between Joe and Angela. Instead of bringing them together, the experience highlights how disconnected they have become. Another argument erupts between them, and Joe's accumulated frustration finally boils over. He becomes openly hostile toward Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk and begins blaming them for the chaos that has unfolded. Yet his anger is increasingly revealed to be misdirected. The neighbors did not create the fundamental problems in Joe and Angela's marriage, they merely provided the circumstances that forced those problems into the open. At this point, Pi 8 tilde plus minus A intervenes. Rather than allowing the evening to end in another pointless argument, she encourages Joe and Angela to stop focusing on the immediate situation and discuss the state of their marriage honestly. Her intervention changes the direction of the story. Until this point, the dinner has largely been about distractions, the neighbors' noise, sexual curiosity, jealousy, social embarrassment, and the possibility of experimentation. Now the characters are forced to address the issue underneath all of those distractions, to the fact that Joe and Angela have become deeply unhappy together. As Joe and Angela begin speaking honestly, years of resentment emerge. They acknowledge that their arguments have become habitual and that they often criticize one another because they no longer know how to communicate their actual feelings. Small disagreements have accumulated into a larger emotional divide. Neither partner feels fully understood, appreciated, or desired. Their marriage has become less about shared intimacy and more about maintaining a familiar domestic structure. They are still living together and raising their daughter, Maggie, but their emotional connection has weakened to the point where they have almost stopped functioning as romantic partners. One of the most revealing admissions comes when Joe and Angela acknowledge that they have not had sex for a year. The revelation provides an important explanation for why the possibility of sexual experimentation initially seemed so attractive. Their interest in Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk's lifestyle was not simply curiosity, it also exposed the extent of their own deprivation and dissatisfaction. However, the conversation makes clear that the absence of sex is only one symptom of their larger problems. Even if they suddenly resume their physical relationship, the resentment and emotional distance between them would remain unless they address the underlying causes. Pi 8 tilde plus minus A therefore challenges Joe and Angela to consider whether remaining married is genuinely benefiting either of them. Their daughter, Maggie, has become one of the main reasons they continue to stay together, but Pi 8 tilde plus minus A questions whether remaining in an unhappy relationship solely for the sake of a child is necessarily the healthiest choice. She suggests that children can be affected by constant tension and resentment just as much as by separation. Her point is not simply that Joe and Angela should divorce, but that they must stop using Maggie as the only justification for maintaining a relationship that no longer functions. At the same time, Pi 8 tilde plus minus A presents them with another possibility. They could attempt to redefine their relationship. Their marriage may no longer work in its current form, but that does not necessarily mean that every possibility for their connection has disappeared. They could attempt to establish a new understanding of one another, communicate more honestly, and decide what kind of relationship they genuinely want. However, such a transformation would require both of them to abandon the patterns of resentment and avoidance that have defined their marriage for so long. If they cannot do that, then separation may ultimately be the more honest path. Joe and Angela gradually accept that they cannot simply return to their old routine after everything that has been revealed. For the first time, they seriously discuss the possibility of separating. The conversation is painful because separation would affect not only their relationship but also their home, their family structure, and their daughter. Yet there is also a sense of relief because they are finally acknowledging a possibility they have likely been avoiding for a long time. Instead of fighting over another minor issue, they begin thinking practically about what their lives might look like if they no longer remain together as a conventional married couple. Their discussion does not produce a definitive answer. Neither Joe nor Angela suddenly knows exactly what they should do, and the film does not present separation as an uncomplicated solution. They are still emotionally connected, still uncertain about their future, and still affected by everything that has happened during the evening. Their willingness to discuss separation therefore represents not necessarily the end of their relationship but the beginning of an honest assessment of what that relationship has become. While Joe and Angela are absorbed in this conversation, Pi+A and Hawk quietly leave the apartment. Their departure is significant because it removes the external catalyst that has dominated the evening. Without the neighbors present, Joe and Angela are left alone with the reality of their own relationship. The irony is that the couple initially believed the dinner was about getting to know their upstairs neighbors and possibly resolving their noise dispute. Instead, the neighbors have become the instruments through which Joe and Angela discover the truth about themselves. After Pi+A and Hawk have gone, Joe retreats to his office. The emotional exhaustion of the evening leaves him seeking something familiar, and he turns toward the piano. Music has always been an important part of his identity, yet he has previously refused to play, suggesting that his creative frustration has become another area of his life that he has emotionally abandoned. His return to the piano therefore carries significance beyond simply playing music. It represents a small act of reconnecting with a part of himself that he had allowed to disappear. Joe begins playing alone, creating a striking contrast with the chaos and noise that dominated the dinner. The piano provides a quiet space in which he can process everything that has happened without another argument or confrontation. His music becomes an indirect expression of emotions that he has struggled to articulate verbally. Rather than offering a dramatic speech or sudden declaration of love, the film uses this quiet musical moment to communicate the emotional shift that has occurred within him. Angela eventually joins Joe. Her decision to enter the office and share the moment with him is deliberately understated. She does not suddenly declare that their marriage is fixed, nor does Joe make a grand romantic gesture promising that everything will be different. Instead, they simply occupy the same space and share the music. After an evening defined by arguments, jealousy, awkwardness, sexual confusion, and painful revelations, this quiet moment suggests that they have at least rediscovered the ability to exist together without hostility. The conclusion therefore remains intentionally ambiguous. Joe and Angela have not solved their marriage, and the possibility of separation remains very real. The film does not provide a conventional reconciliation in which every conflict is immediately resolved. Instead, the final moment suggests that the most important development is that Joe and Angela have finally stopped pretending that everything is fine. They have acknowledged the seriousness of their problems and begun considering their options honestly. Whether they eventually separate, rebuild their marriage, or establish an entirely different kind of relationship is left unresolved. The final piano sequence also connects Joe's personal and marital struggles. Throughout the story, he has been frustrated by his failure as a musician and by the deterioration of his marriage. Both problems reflect a larger pattern in which he has gradually stopped pursuing the things that once gave his life meaning. By returning to the piano, he takes a small but significant step toward reconnecting with himself. Angela's decision to join him suggests that their future may depend not on recreating the marriage they once had but on discovering whether they can form a healthier relationship from the truth they have finally acknowledged. Ultimately, the invite uses the dinner party as a catalyst for an extensive examination of Joe and Angela's failing marriage. The upstairs neighbors initially appear to be the source of the couple's frustration because of their disruptive behavior, but they eventually become mirrors through which Joe and Angela see the weaknesses in their own relationship. Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk's openness, unconventional lifestyle, and willingness to discuss intimacy force the married couple to confront the emotional and physical distance that has developed between them. What begins as an attempt to socialize with neighbors consequently becomes an unexpected examination of marriage, jealousy, sexual insecurity, communication, parenthood, personal dissatisfaction, and the fear of change. The film's progression from comedy to emotional confrontation is central to its structure. The awkward dinner, missing wine, dietary mistake, arguments, revelations, jealousy, failed sexual experimentation, and Joe's injury provide much of the comedy, but each incident gradually exposes another layer of the central couple's dissatisfaction. By the time Pi 8 tilde plus minus A encourages them to discuss their marriage, the audience understands that the evening was never really about the numbers. Joe and Angela were already facing a crisis before Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk entered their apartment. The dinner simply made it impossible for them to continue ignoring it. In the end, the invite leaves Joe and Angela standing at a crossroads. They can no longer rely on habit, their shared home, or their daughter Maggie as reasons to avoid confronting the condition of their marriage. They must decide whether they can genuinely change the way they communicate and reconnect, or whether their relationship has reached the point where separation is the most honest choice. The film does not provide an easy answer because its central argument is that relationships rarely have simple solutions. Instead, it concludes on a quieter and more hopeful note. Joe playing the piano and Angela joining him does not necessarily mean that their marriage has been saved, but it suggests that after years of emotional distance, they have finally begun to listen, reflect, and see one another differently. The dinner may have failed as a conventional social gathering, but it succeeds as the catalyst that forces Joe and Angela to confront the truth about their lives and consider what they genuinely want from their future. The principal cast of The Invite consists of 4 central performers: Seth Rogen, Olivia Wilde, Penelope copyright Cruz, and Edward Norton, whose characters form the film's entire emotional and comedic core. A24 officially identifies these 4 actors as the film's starring ensemble, while current cast listings also confirm their respective roles as Joe, Angela, Pi 8 tilde plus minus A, and Hawk. Seth Rogen as Joe. Seth Rogen plays Joe, a struggling musician and jazz teacher whose professional disappointments are closely connected to the frustrations he experiences in his personal life. Joe is married to Angela, but the relationship has deteriorated into a pattern of constant arguments, emotional distance, and diminishing intimacy. He is particularly irritated by the behavior of their upstairs neighbors, Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk, whose loud sex life frequently disturbs him and becomes one of the most visible sources of conflict between Joe and Angela. Rogen's performance combines his recognizable comic timing with a more vulnerable and emotionally exhausted portrayal of a man who has become increasingly dissatisfied with his marriage and his life. Joe's bluntness and lack of social restraint initially make him appear abrasive, especially during the dinner party, but his direct personality unexpectedly fascinates Pi 8 tilde plus minus A and Hawk. As the evening becomes more revealing, Rogen portrays Joe's jealousy, insecurity, frustration, embarrassment, and emotional vulnerability, particularly as he realizes that his marriage has become sexually and emotionally disconnected. His performance becomes increasingly dramatic as Joe is forced to confront the possibility that his relationship with Angela may no longer be sustainable in its current form. Olivia Wilde is Angela. Olivia Wilde portrays Angela, Joe's wife and the other half of the film's troubled central marriage. Angela is a stay-at-home wife who initially appears determined to maintain the appearance of a stable and socially successful household despite the growing problems within her relationship. She is responsible for inviting their upstairs neighbors to dinner, hoping that a friendly evening will improve their relationship with pi8+A and Hawk and perhaps provide some excitement in her increasingly routine life. However, her preparations for the dinner quickly become chaotic, and her nervous attempts to impress the guests repeatedly clash with Joe's blunt and confrontational personality. As the evening progresses, Angela becomes increasingly fascinated by pi8+A and Hawk's unconventional approach to intimacy, particularly because her own marriage has become physically and emotionally distant. Wilde's performance balances Angela's humor and awkwardness with her deeper feelings of frustration, insecurity, loneliness, and uncertainty. As both the film's director and one of its principal actors, Wilde gives Angela a particularly complex emotional trajectory, moving her from an anxious hostess trying to control the evening to a woman forced to confront the possibility that her marriage to Joe may have reached a decisive turning point. Penelope copyright Lope Cruz is pi8+A. Penelope copyright Lope Cruz plays pi8+A, one of Joe and Angela's upstairs neighbors and one of the film's most confident and unconventional characters. pi8+A is a diverse copyright and a sexologist who possesses a much more open and adventurous attitude toward relationships and sexuality than Joe and Angela initially expect. Along with Hawk, she participates in sex parties, which explains the noises that have repeatedly disturbed the couple living below them. pi8+A's confidence and willingness to discuss intimate subjects make her an immediate contrast to Angela's nervousness and Joe's discomfort. She is also perceptive enough to recognize that Joe and Angela's apparent interest in sexual experimentation is connected to much deeper problems within their marriage. Although she initially considers inviting them into her and Hawk's unconventional social circle, she becomes increasingly concerned as she observes their constant arguments and emotional hostility. pi8+A ultimately takes on an unexpectedly therapeutic role during the dinner, encouraging Joe and Angela to stop blaming one another and honestly discuss the condition of their relationship. Cruz's performance therefore combines sensual confidence, humor, intelligence, emotional directness, and a more serious understanding of the psychological problems affecting the central couple. Edward Norton as Hawk. Edward Norton portrays Hawk, pi8+A's widowed partner and Joe and Angela's upstairs neighbor. Hawk initially appears relaxed, charismatic, confident, and comfortable with the unconventional nature of his relationship with pi8+A. His calm demeanor and apparent ease with intimacy create a strong contrast with Joe's insecurity and discomfort. Hawk is part of the sexually adventurous lifestyle that has caused the noise complaints from downstairs, but he and pi8+A eventually explain the circumstances openly rather than continuing to conceal them. Hawk's presence also becomes a source of jealousy for Joe after Joe discovers that Hawk has previously seen Angela naked through a window. This revelation adds another layer of tension to the evening and intensifies Joe's insecurity about both his marriage and his relationship with the neighbors. Norton gives Hawk an understated confidence that initially makes him appear to be the more emotionally secure counterpart to Joe, while the developing story gradually demonstrates that his relationship with pi8+A is also more complicated than it first appears. His performance helps establish the contrast between the two couples while also preventing Hawk from becoming merely an idealized symbol of sexual or emotional freedom. Together, Rogen, Wilde, Cruz, and Norton form the film's central quartet, with virtually the entire story driven by the shifting relationships among Joe, Angela, pi8+A, and Hawk. The casting is particularly important because The Invite is fundamentally a dialogue-driven, character-focused comedy drama rather than a spectacle-oriented film. The four actors must carry the movie through awkward conversations, escalating arguments, comic misunderstandings, intimate revelations, jealousy, sexual tension, and emotionally serious discussions about marriage. Their contrasting personalities create the film's central dramatic structure, Joe and Angela represent a couple struggling with emotional and physical disconnection, while Pi tilde plus minus A and Hawk initially appeared to represent a more open and unconventional approach to intimacy. As the evening progresses, however, the boundaries between these two couples become increasingly complicated, allowing all four performances to contribute to the film's larger exploration of love, marriage, desire, communication, insecurity, and the difficulty of truly understanding another person. The development of The Invite began in March 2021, when it was announced that an English-language remake of the 2020 Spanish comedy drama The People Upstairs, Sentimental, was being developed by producer David Permit. The original Spanish film was directed by Cesc Gay and was itself based on Gay's stage play Els Va tilde Macron en Estadalt, also known in English as The Neighbors Upstairs. The source material centers on the idea of using a dinner between neighboring couples as the starting point for a much broader exploration of marriage, intimacy, sexuality, communication, and emotional dissatisfaction. By the time the American remake entered development, the original film had already attracted international attention and had been adapted for audiences in several other countries, including France, Italy, Switzerland, and South Korea, demonstrating the story's adaptability across different cultures and languages. The decision to remake The People Upstairs for an English-speaking audience reflected the strength of the original premise, particularly its ability to generate comedy and drama almost entirely from character interaction. The project was conceived as more than a straightforward translation of the Spanish film, with the filmmakers seeking to adapt the story and its relationship dynamics for an American setting while preserving the central concept of two couples whose seemingly ordinary social gathering gradually exposes deeply buried problems. The San Francisco setting and contemporary American characters ultimately provided the framework through which the original material could be reinterpreted for a new audience. In March 2022, the project moved into a more active phase when Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Faris, the directing team known for films such as Little Miss Sunshine and Battle of the Sexes, were hired to direct the adaptation. At the same time, Rashida Jones and Will McCormack were attached to write the screenplay. Their involvement was particularly significant because the film's success depended heavily on dialogue, character chemistry, awkward humor, and the gradual escalation of a seemingly ordinary dinner conversation into an emotionally revealing confrontation. Jones and McCormack were tasked with translating the original Spanish source material into an English-language screenplay while retaining its adult humor and examination of complicated relationships. The project continued to develop over the following year, and in May 2023 it was announced under the title The Invite. At that stage, Amy Adams, Paul Rudd, and Tessa Thompson were attached to star in the film. Their involvement represented an earlier version of the project and indicated that the remake was being assembled around a prominent ensemble of established Hollywood performers. The combination of Adams, Rudd, and Thompson suggested that the film was being positioned as a sophisticated, star-driven relationship comedy with enough dramatic material to appeal to audiences beyond the traditional romantic comedy market. However, despite the high-profile casting, the production did not immediately proceed into a completed filming cycle. Development subsequently stalled, leaving the project in an extended period of uncertainty. During this period, the earlier creative and casting plans were ultimately superseded as the filmmakers reconfigured the production. The delay was significant because the project had already undergone several stages of development, including the attachment of directors, screenwriters, a new title, and a high-profile cast. Rather than abandoning the remake, the production was eventually revived with a substantially different creative team and ensemble. The project was reconfigured in April 2025, when Olivia Wilde was announced as the new director. Wilde also joined the cast in one of the leading roles, taking over as the actress portraying Angela. The new version of the film was built around an ensemble consisting of Seth Rogen, Penelope copyright Cruz, Edward Norton, and Wilde herself. This marked a major change from the earlier casting configuration involving Adams, Rudd, and Thompson. Wilde's appointment was especially important because she became both the director and one of the central performers, giving the project a more personal creative identity while also taking responsibility for guiding the tone of the relationship comedy. The new casting also established the film's final central quartet. Seth Rogen was cast as Joe, the struggling musician whose marriage is increasingly strained by emotional distance and resentment. Olivia Wilde plays Angela, Joe's wife, whose attempt to host a dinner for their upstairs neighbors becomes a catalyst for confronting the problems in their marriage. Penelope copyright Lope Cruz portrays Penelope +A, the confident and unconventional neighbor whose openness about relationships and sexuality challenges Joe and Angela's assumptions. And Edward Norton plays Hawk, Penelope as partner, whose relaxed personality and unconventional relationship with her become a source of fascination and insecurity for the couple downstairs. The chemistry among these four performers became central to the film because the story is structured almost entirely around their interactions. By the time Wilde became attached as director, production had moved rapidly toward filming. Principal photography was underway in Los Angeles by April 2025. Although the story is set in San Francisco, Los Angeles served as the principal production location, allowing the filmmakers to recreate the residential environment required for the film's apartment-centered narrative. The decision to maintain the story's San Francisco identity while filming in Los Angeles reflects a common production approach in which locations are selected based on practical, financial, and creative considerations rather than simply reproducing every setting in the city where the story takes place. The film's development also remained connected to the original Spanish material throughout this transition. McCormack and Jones's screenplay continued to serve as the foundation for the English-language adaptation, while Wilde's direction provided a new interpretation of the material. The resulting production retained the central concept of the original, two couples whose interactions expose the weaknesses, contradictions, and hidden desires within their relationships. However, the final version was shaped around the personalities and comedic strengths of its new cast, allowing the adaptation to function as its own contemporary American relationship comedy rather than merely reproducing the original film. The project also carries a personal dedication to Diane Keaton, who died on October 11, 2025. The completed film is dedicated to her memory. Keaton's connection to the project and the circumstances surrounding the dedication add an additional emotional element to the film's production history, particularly because the dedication followed the completion of the project's major production period. Her death in October 2025 occurred after filming had begun and after the film's creative direction and principal cast had been established. Overall, the development of The Invite was unusually lengthy and involved several major creative changes before reaching its final form. The project originated in 2021 as a remake of Chess Gaze The People Upstairs, moved forward in 2022 with Jonathan Dayton and Valerie Ferris attached to director and Rashida Jones and Will McCormack writing the screenplay, and then entered another phase in 2023 with Amy Adams, Paul Rudd, and Tessa Thompson attached to star. After development stalled, the project was substantially reconfigured in 2025, with Olivia Wilde becoming director and joining Seth Rogen, Penelope copyright Lope Cruz, and Edward Norton as the new principal cast. Filming was already underway in Los Angeles by April 2025, transforming the long-developing remake into the final production that would eventually become The Invite. The film's development history therefore reflects a project that evolved through multiple directors, casts, and creative configurations before settling on Wilde's interpretation and the four-person ensemble that ultimately defined the finished film. Principal photography for The Invite was carried out during a relatively compact production schedule, with the filmmakers shooting the movie over 23 days and deliberately filming the story in chronological order. This approach was particularly well suited to the film's structure because much of the narrative takes place during a single dinner gathering in which the relationships between the four principal characters gradually change over the course of one evening. By filming the events in sequence, the actors were able to experience the emotional progression of the story in the same order as their characters, allowing the tension, awkwardness, intimacy, arguments, and revelations to build naturally rather than requiring the performers to repeatedly move backward and forward through the emotional timeline. Although the principal production was based in Los Angeles, the filmmakers also undertook location shooting in San Francisco, the city in which the story is set. On May 21, 2025, it was reported that filming had taken place in San Francisco on the Tuesday and Wednesday of that week, with the production using a variety of recognizable locations throughout the city. These location sequences helped give the film an authentic Bay Area identity and provided visual material beyond the apartment-centered environment in which most of this story unfolds. The use of actual San Francisco locations was particularly important because the city is not merely a backdrop in the story. Joe and Angela's everyday lives, their neighborhood, their relationship with their upstairs neighbors, and the social environment surrounding them are all connected to the distinctive character of San Francisco. One of the San Francisco filming locations was the auditorium at AP Giannini Middle School in the Sunset District. The school provided an appropriate setting for scenes connected to Joe's professional life and his work as a jazz teacher. Because Joe is a musician who teaches at a conservatory, locations associated with education and performance were important for establishing his identity outside his troubled marriage. The use of a real school auditorium also helped the production create a believable environment for Joe's musical and teaching activities rather than relying entirely on constructed studio sets. The production also incorporated a sequence filmed aboard a Bay Area rapid transit BART train, specifically along the route between Glen Park Station and Balboa Park Station. Shooting on an operating public transportation system gave the film another distinctly San Francisco visual element and allowed the filmmakers to place the characters within an authentic urban environment. The BART sequence contrasts with the largely contained apartment setting and helps establish the wider world in which Joe and Angela live. It also contributes to the film's naturalistic quality by allowing the characters to move through recognizable public spaces rather than existing exclusively within controlled interiors. Another notable San Francisco location was the Make-Out Room, a nightclub in the Mission District. The venue provided the production with a genuine nightlife environment and helped capture the distinctive atmosphere of one of San Francisco's best-known entertainment neighborhoods. Its inclusion is particularly appropriate for a film that explores adult relationships, sexuality, social interaction, and unconventional approaches to intimacy. The nightclub setting offers a visual and tonal contrast to Joe and Angela's apartment, where much of their marital tension is expressed through domestic arguments and uncomfortable conversations. The filmmakers also shot at the Castro District Farmers Market, incorporating one of San Francisco's recognizable community spaces into the film. The farmers market provided an everyday urban environment that contrasted with the more intimate apartment sequences and helped ground the characters within a functioning city. Such location work allowed the invite to feel connected to the surrounding San Francisco community rather than presenting the city solely through famous landmarks. The filmmakers similarly used Mall and Ori Delicatessen, another established San Francisco location, adding another layer of local authenticity to the production. The decision to film in recognizable but ordinary San Francisco locations was consistent with the movie's overall emphasis on realism and character-driven storytelling. Rather than treating San Francisco simply as a postcard backdrop, the production used schools, public transportation, neighborhood businesses, markets, and nightlife venues to construct an environment that felt lived in and contemporary. This approach complemented the film's intimate tone, allowing the characters' personal problems to unfold within recognizable everyday surroundings. A particularly notable aspect of the production was the decision to shoot the movie in chronological order. This was an unusual but deliberate choice that became especially valuable because the film's emotional structure depends on gradual escalation. Joe and Angela begin the story already experiencing marital difficulties, but their dinner with pi 8 tilde plus minus a and Hawk progressively exposes increasingly personal information about their relationships. The actors therefore needed to move from relatively controlled social behavior to embarrassment, curiosity, jealousy, sexual tension, confrontation, and finally emotional honesty. Shooting the scenes sequentially enabled the performers to build those changes progressively, potentially making the later scenes feel more emotionally connected to everything that had occurred earlier in the production. The chronological approach was particularly useful for the four principal performers to Seth Rogen, Olivia Wilde, Penelope copyright Cruz, and Edward Norton because their characters' relationships changed dramatically over the course of the evening. Joe initially regards +A and Hawk as irritating neighbors, while Angela is eager to impress them. As the dinner progresses, the couples become more comfortable, personal information is revealed, sexual possibilities are discussed, jealousy emerges, and the evening eventually turns into a serious examination of Joe and Angela's marriage. By filming these developments in order, the actors could allow their relationships to evolve naturally rather than having to recreate earlier emotional states after already filming later confrontational scenes. The production also included an element of actor-driven creativity. During the third act, Edward Norton's character Hawk delivers a monologue explaining the origin of his name. The monologue was written by Norton himself, giving the actor an opportunity to contribute directly to his character's dialogue and backstory. The scene also incorporated improvisation from Seth Rogen, whose immediate response to Norton's performance was improvised. This combination of prepared material and spontaneous interaction reflects the film's broader dependence on naturalistic dialogue and chemistry among the four leads. Because the movie is structured around conversations and interpersonal reactions, allowing the actors some freedom to respond naturally could help maintain the sense that the characters were discovering things about one another in real time. The filmmakers also made the technical decision to shoot the invite on 35mm film rather than digitally. The use of traditional 35mm photography contributes to the movie's tactile visual character and supports its intimate, grounded aesthetic. The grain and texture associated with film stock can give interior scenes a warmer and more organic appearance, which is particularly appropriate for a story centered on a domestic apartment, personal relationships, and ordinary urban environments. The format also complements the production's decision to combine controlled interior scenes with real San Francisco locations, creating a visual style that feels cinematic without becoming excessively polished or artificial. The choice of 35mm was especially appropriate for the film's chamber drama qualities. Much of the story depends on subtle changes in facial expression, bodied language, silence, and proximity between the four characters. A photographic format with a tangible visual texture allows these intimate details to become an important part of the storytelling. The apartment scenes, in particular, benefit from the sense that the characters are inhabiting a real physical environment rather than simply performing on a soundstage. The combination of film photography, practical locations, and chronological shooting therefore supports the movie's emphasis on authenticity. The production's limited 23-day shooting schedule also reflects the film's relatively contained nature. Unlike a large-scale action film requiring extensive visual effects, elaborate sets, or months of location work, the invite relies primarily on performances, dialogue, and carefully controlled environments. Its relatively small number of principal characters and strong focus on a central apartment setting allowed the filmmakers to concentrate resources on the actors and their interactions. At the same time, the San Francisco location work provided enough variety to expand the visual scope of the story without changing its fundamental character-driven approach. The combination of Los Angeles-based production and San Francisco location photography allowed the filmmakers to balance production practicality with the authenticity required by the story. San Francisco's neighborhoods, transportation system, businesses, markets, and cultural venues provide the film with a distinctive geographical identity, while the controlled production environment allowed the filmmakers to maintain the precise continuity required by the dinner party narrative. This balance was particularly important because the film's plot moves between Joe's professional world, the couple's home life, and the wider social environment represented by their neighbors and the city around them. Overall, the filming of The Invite was designed around the movie's intimate and dialogue-heavy nature. The production was completed in just 23 days, with the story filmed chronologically, and it combined controlled production work with location photography in San Francisco. The use of locations including A.P. Giannini Middle School's auditorium, a BART train traveling between Glen Park and Balboa Park stations, the Makeout Room in the Mission District, the Castro District Farmers Market, and Molinari Delicatessen gave the film a strong sense of place. Shooting on 35mm film added a traditional cinematic texture, while Edward Norton's contribution to Hawke's third-act monologue and Seth Rogen's improvised response provided an example of the collaborative performance style used during production. Together, these choices help create the visually grounded, performance-driven comedy drama in which the technical approach remained closely connected to the film's central focus on four characters whose relationships changed dramatically over the course of one revealing evening. The Invite had its world premiere on January 24, 2026, at the Eccles Theatre as part of the 2026 Sundance Film Festival. The Sundance premiere marked the film's first public screening and provided its filmmakers and cast with an opportunity to introduce the completed comedy drama to festival audiences before its commercial theatrical release. The film's appearance at Sundance was particularly significant because it arrived at the festival as a character-driven adult comedy featuring an established ensemble led by Seth Rogen, Olivia Wilde, Penelope copyright Cruz, and Edward Norton. Its festival launch also generated immediate interest from distributors, with the film becoming one of the titles that attracted substantial attention from companies looking to acquire theatrical and streaming rights. Following its Sundance premiere, a competitive distribution market developed around the film. Several major studios and distributors were reportedly interested in acquiring its rights, including A24, Apple TV, Black Bear Pictures, Focus Features, Neon, Netflix, Searchlight Pictures, and Sony Pictures. The level of interest reflected the combination of the film's recognizable cast, Olivia Wilde's position as both director and performer, its Sundance exposure, and the commercial potential of an adult-oriented comedy drama with an established ensemble. Reported bids reached as high as approximately $10 million during the early stages of the negotiations, demonstrating that distributors viewed the film as a potentially valuable acquisition rather than simply a small festival title. The distribution negotiations also became notable because of a disagreement over the type of release being proposed. At least one studio reportedly offered an unspecified amount for a streaming-only release. Wilde and the filmmaking team rejected that proposal, with Wilde characterizing the offer as resembling a bribe because of the pressure to bypass a conventional theatrical release. The filmmakers' decision reflected their preference for seeing The Invite receive a theatrical platform, particularly given the movie's festival pedigree, cinematic presentation, and ensemble cast. Rather than allowing the film to move directly to a streaming service, the team continued negotiations with distributors capable of providing a theatrical rollout. As the bidding competition intensified, the field of interested distributors gradually narrowed, with A24 and Focus Features emerging as the leading contenders. Offers reportedly climbed beyond $12 million, making the distribution negotiations one of the more closely watched acquisition stories surrounding the film's Sundance premiere. The competition demonstrated the value placed on the movie's combination of recognizable talent, festival exposure, and commercially accessible adult comedy. The negotiations ultimately continued down to the final stages, with the distributors competing for the opportunity to control the film's U.S. theatrical release. A last-minute bid also came from Warner Bros. Pictures' specialty division, which was subsequently known as Warner Bros. Clockwork. Despite this late attempt to acquire the project, A24 ultimately secured the U.S. distribution rights. The acquisition established A24 as the film's principal American theatrical distributor and ensured that The Invite would receive a conventional cinema release rather than being moved directly into an exclusively streaming-based distribution model. A24's involvement also placed the film within a distribution portfolio known for releasing independent, filmmaker-driven, and adult-oriented films to theatrical audiences. Internationally, The Invite continued its festival and theatrical rollout beyond the United States. The film was selected for the main competition of the 73rd Sydney Film Festival, giving it another prominent international festival platform and placing it among the festival's competitive feature selections. Its inclusion in the Sydney program expanded the film's exposure to Australian audiences and international critics following its Sundance debut. The film was also programmed in the Piazza Grande section of the 79th Locarno Film Festival, another major international showcase known for presenting prominent contemporary cinema to large festival audiences. These festival appearances helped extend the film's life beyond its original Sundance launch and contributed to its international profile before and around its theatrical distribution. The film subsequently entered its commercial theatrical release period in the United States. The Invite began its American theatrical run with the limited release on June 26, 2026. The limited opening allowed the distributor to introduce the film gradually, building awareness through early audience reactions, reviews, festival recognition, and word of mouth before expanding to a substantially larger number of theaters. This type of release strategy was consistent with the film's positioning as an adult-oriented comedy drama rather than a major studio blockbuster, giving the distributor an opportunity to evaluate audience interest before committing to the film's wider rollout. The movie then received its wide U.S. theatrical release on July 10, 2026. The expansion brought The Invite to a much broader domestic audience following its initial limited engagement. The wide release represented the culmination of the film's journey from Sundance premiere and high-profile distribution bidding war to commercial theatrical availability. A24's decision to give the film both the limited opening and subsequent wide expansion allowed it to benefit from the momentum generated by its festival premiere while still providing it with a conventional theatrical window. In the United Kingdom, The Invite was released theatrically on July 3, 2026. Placing its British opening between the film's US limited release and American-wide expansion. The UK rollout formed part of the film's broader international distribution strategy and gave British audiences access to the movie relatively early in its theatrical life. The UK rights had been associated with Black Bear Pictures, which acquired the territory's rights from Film Nation Entertainment, adding another layer to the film's international distribution arrangements. The staggered release schedule therefore saw The Invite move from a January festival premiere to an increasingly broad theatrical presence during the summer of 2026. Its Sundance debut on January 24 introduced the film to the festival circuit, while the subsequent distribution bidding war generated substantial industry interest. A24's successful acquisition of the U.S. rights established the foundation for the American theatrical rollout, while festival selections at Sydney and Locarno broadened its international visibility. The U.S. limited opening on June 26, UK release on July 3, and US-wide release on July 10 then transformed the project from a festival title into a commercially available theatrical feature. Overall, the release history of The Invite was marked by an unusually competitive path from festival premiere to theatrical distribution. The film attracted multiple major distributors after Sundance, reportedly generated bids exceeding $12 million, rejected at least one streaming-only proposal, and ultimately became an A24 theatrical release in the United States despite a late competing offer from Warner Brothers' specialty division. Its appearances at the Sydney and Locarno film festivals further strengthened its international profile, while its staggered theatrical rollout allowed it to reach audiences in the United States and United Kingdom during the summer of 2026. The resulting release strategy positioned The Invite as a filmmaker-driven adult comedy drama intended to be experienced in cinemas before continuing its life through subsequent home entertainment and digital distribution. As of August 9, 2026, The Invite has grossed approximately $42.9 million worldwide, consisting of $24.3 million from the United States and Canada and $18.6 million from international markets. The film's box office performance represents a solid result for an adult-oriented, dialogue-driven comedy drama that began its theatrical run with the limited release before expanding more widely. Its worldwide gross reflects the film's gradual theatrical rollout, strong initial per-screen performance, and subsequent expansion into additional domestic and international markets. The Invite began its domestic theatrical run with the limited release, opening in selected theaters before its nationwide expansion. During its first weekend, the film earned approximately $379,000 in Los Angeles and another $54,000 in New York City. The combined performance of roughly $433,000 from the two major markets was particularly impressive because all of the film's initial screenings in those locations were reported to have sold out. Its strong performance on a very limited number of screens resulted in one of the highest per-screen openings of the year, generating significant momentum ahead of the film's broader theatrical expansion. The film also performed strongly during its opening weekend in the United Kingdom, where it grossed approximately £799,382, equivalent to around $1.06 million at the reported exchange rate. The British opening placed The Invite in third place at the UK box office during its debut weekend. The result demonstrated that the film's relationship-centered comedy and high-profile ensemble had appeal beyond the North American market and provided an encouraging early indication of its international commercial prospects. Following its successful limited engagement, The Invite underwent a substantial expansion in the United States. In its third weekend, the film increased its domestic footprint from only 28 screens to approximately 1,610 locations. This represented one of the major stages of its theatrical rollout, transforming the film from a specialty release concentrated in selected markets into a much broader national release. During that expansion weekend, the film earned more than $5.7 million domestically, bringing its cumulative U.S. and Canadian gross to approximately $7.38 million at that point. The film ranked 6th at the domestic box office for the weekend, a notable placement for a relationship-focused comedy drama competing against much larger mainstream releases. The strong transition from a handful of screens to more than 1,600 locations was especially significant for the film's overall commercial performance. Its early sellouts and unusually strong per-screen average created sufficient audience interest for the distributor to substantially increase the number of theaters showing the movie. Rather than relying exclusively on a concentrated festival or specialty audience, The Invite was therefore able to reach a much wider theatrical audience during the summer release period. International markets also played an important role in this film's final worldwide total, with $18.6 million earned outside the United States and Canada. International revenue accounts for a substantial portion of the film's approximately $42.9 million worldwide gross. The United Kingdom was among the film's strongest early international markets, while its appearances at major festivals such as Sundance, Sydney, and Locarno helped increase international awareness before and during its theatrical rollout. Overall, The Invite achieved a worldwide box office gross of approximately $42.9 million as of August 9, 2026, with $24.3 million domestically and $18.6 million internationally. Its theatrical journey was characterized by a highly successful limited opening, including sold-out screenings in Los Angeles and New York, followed by a strong UK debut and a major US expansion to 1,610 locations. The film's ability to turn strong performances on a small number of screens into a broader commercial run was an important factor in its box office trajectory, allowing the Olivia Wilde-directed comedy drama to become a comparatively successful theatrical release despite its modest, character-driven scale. The Invite has received strongly positive critical reviews, with critics broadly praising Olivia Wilde's direction, the chemistry and performances of its four principal actors, its sophisticated adult humor, and its willingness to explore marriage, sex, emotional dissatisfaction, and communication without reducing those subjects to conventional romantic comedy formulas. The film's reception has been particularly notable for the way reviewers have described it as both genuinely funny and emotionally uncomfortable, with many critics appreciating how a seemingly simple dinner party premise gradually develops into a more complicated examination of long-term relationships. At the same time, some reviewers have criticized the film's third act, emotional transitions, and musical score, arguing that its more dramatic turns do not always feel completely earned. Overall, however, the critical response has remained overwhelmingly favorable. On Rotten Tomatoes, The Invite currently holds a 97% positive rating from 269 critics, with an average score of 8.2. The site's critical consensus describes the film as a sophisticated farce that combines deliberately uncomfortable humor with strong material for its quartet of leading performers and regards the movie as further evidence of Olivia Wilde's development as an exciting filmmaker. The exceptionally high tomatometer score indicates that the vast majority of professional reviewers found the film worthwhile, while the high average rating suggests that the response has been positive not merely in terms of basic approval but also in terms of the film's overall quality, writing, performances, and direction. The film has performed similarly strongly on Metacritic, where it has received a weighted score of 82 out of 100 based on 47 critics, placing it in the site's universal acclaim category. The Metacritic result reinforces the impression created by Rotten Tomatoes that The Invite has been embraced across a broad range of professional publications. The strong score reflects appreciation for the movie's unusual combination of comedy and relationship drama, as well as the performances of Seth Rogen, Olivia Wilde, Penelope copyright Cruz, and Edward Norton. Rather than being regarded simply as a conventional comedy, the film has generally been treated by critics as a sophisticated adult-oriented character piece with substantial dramatic ambitions. Audience reaction has also been favorable. According to PostTrack, audiences surveyed gave The Invite an 89% positive score, while 69% said they would definitely recommend the film. These audience figures suggest that the movie's appeal has extended beyond professional critics, particularly among viewers receptive to its adult humor, awkward social situations, relationship conflicts, and unconventional exploration of intimacy. The relatively high recommendation figure also indicates that the film's provocative subject matter did not prevent it from connecting with a substantial portion of its theatrical audience. Among individual critics, Owen Gleiberman of Variety described The Invite as marvelously entertaining and drew comparisons between the film and Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf. The comparison highlights the way Wilde's film uses the interaction between two couples to transform personal disagreements into a broader examination of relationships and emotional dissatisfaction. Like the classic relationship drama, The Invite derives much of its tension from conversations that gradually become more revealing and confrontational, although it approaches those themes through a considerably more contemporary and comedic perspective. Adam Chitwood of The Wrap similarly compared The Invite to the great-great-grandchild of Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, emphasizing the movie's ability to make its relationship problems feel endlessly relatable, sometimes uncomfortably so. Chitwood's assessment points to one of the film's most frequently praised qualities: its characters may become involved in increasingly unusual circumstances, but the emotional problems underlying their behavior remain recognizable. Joe and Angela's arguments, insecurity, lack of communication, sexual distance, and uncertainty about the future of their marriage provide the realistic foundation beneath the film's increasingly outrageous dinner-party situations. Benjamin Lee of The Guardian awarded the film 4 out of 5 stars, praising it as a genuinely funny and uncommonly intelligent comedy for adults. His response reflects the broader critical appreciation for the film's willingness to treat adult relationships as both comedic material and serious dramatic subject matter. Rather than relying solely on conventional jokes or romantic misunderstandings, the screenplay uses humor to examine uncomfortable questions about commitment, attraction, resentment, sexual dissatisfaction, and whether remaining together is always the best option for a couple. Kate Rebland of IndieWire gave The Invite a B+, acknowledging some weaknesses in the third act while nevertheless describing the remainder of the film as a major pleasure and praising it as a genuinely adult comedy with substantial ideas and plenty of humor. Her assessment is representative of one of the more common reservations among critics. While the first and second acts were frequently praised for their sharp dialogue and escalating interpersonal comedy, some reviewers felt that the movie's final dramatic developments were less controlled than the material leading up to them. Nevertheless, Rogen considered the film's strengths considerably more significant than its shortcomings. David Rooney of The Hollywood Reporter also responded positively, effectively declaring the film well worth receiving in his assessment. His reaction emphasizes the film's ability to turn an apparently ordinary invitation to dinner into a compelling dramatic and comedic situation. The central concept gives the four actors ample opportunity to interact, confront one another, reveal secrets, and change their perceptions of each other, allowing the movie to function almost like a modern chamber piece built around escalating conversation.